Hi, I'm Stephanie Burgis. I'm the author of the Raven Heir, as well as the Dragon with a Chocolate Heart trilogy, and I am very happy to be here with you. Absolutely. So I've lived in Wales for 12 years now, and it is by far the most beautiful place I've ever lived in my life. I live in a little Welsh valley surrounded by mountains and with beautiful magical woods nearby and just so many castles, so many castles. And our favorite castle is Castle Raglan, which is only a few minutes away from our house. And I have been there so many times in my life on my own or with my children, or around here. It's even used as a setting for a lot of children's play parties, birthday parties, and so on. So when I found out that Raglan Castle had actually been sort of a key place in the Wars of the Roses during the Middle Ages, that suddenly made the history really come to life for me, because it's such a special resonant place for me and for my family. And suddenly the hundreds of years seemed to compress together, and I could actually imagine myself into that period of terrible wars over the throne, and also imagine what it would be like to be a child caught up in those if you're one of the possible heirs to the throne and people are willing to kill you or make you king or you're suddenly thrown into all of this peril nonstop just because of the family you've been born into. So the castle, and Castle Raglan particularly, were a huge inspiration for the Raven Heir. But also, my heroine Cordelia and her family have been growing up in this enchanted woodland, and that came straight from the woods around where I live in Wales. My family loves our local woods. Both of my children have grown up playing games about, fighting goblins and finding hidden forest dragons and all sorts. So it was only too easy to imagine my heroine's woods where magic was real. And again, Wales is famous for its mountains. And in my fantasy kingdom in the Raven Heir, all of the land's magic is centered on one particular mountain, Mount Corv. And again, it's only too easy to believe that the mountains can be magical when you live here, because every day my children and I look at the mist, surrounding the mountains, and we talk about how maybe that's dragon's breath, or maybe the dragons are using it to hide behind. Cordelia and her triplets have to decide if they're going to follow their mother's orders, which was the mother told them, just run, just keep yourself safe, that's all that matters, or if they're actually going to try to heal this broken kingdom in so many ways. And in many ways, I think that's resonant in our world too, as we look at climate change, as we look at so many issues and real world horrible things that happen. And you can either retreat, and sometimes we all need to retreat. Sometimes that's the only option we can do. Or you can do your best and you can try to work towards healing it and towards fixing it. And you have to, and believing that things can get better. So that's what that message of healing is all about for me. And for all of us, I would say, as we're growing up, we'll run into the expectations of our families, of our culture, of the media we consume, everything. And we have to find our own way through and find out how we can be responsible people within our communities and take responsibility for the things we care about, but also remain ourselves and find freedom and relish real individuality too. And Cordelia has to make some very difficult choices in this book between her freedom and her responsibilities. And I think what's so important is that either extreme can be really dangerous. Whether you're letting yourself be smushed completely into the pattern of what other people think you should be, or whether you're kicking away every responsibility and saying, I don't care about anyone but myself. And that's the other extreme. I think a lot of us, like Cordelia, have to find exactly where we fit in the middle and what's actually right for us. actually, it's a big mixture. This is a great question because I have so many different answers spiraling around in my brain. And of course, the first basic thing is I like stories where heroines save themselves or they work with others to figure out how to save everybody. And I think it's not very interesting to write a heroine who is going to sit back and let other people take charge and make all the decisions. So that's the biggest part. And also, I have to say, I read a lot of books about the women involved in the Wars of the Roses. And I was fascinated by just how active they were. Because if you read a lot of standard history books, you only hear about, the Duke of this and the Earl of this and, these different kings. But actually, the women were really involved in their families. They were strategizing. They were often even leading, their husbands' armies if their husbands were away. They were doing all sorts of stuff throughout history that we don't necessarily read about unless we go hunting really deep. So I would say a lot of the way that we came to think about princesses in particularly the 20th century with Disney films is very different from the way that the women involved in royal and aristocratic families in history actually behaved. They were actually much, much more powerful in their own ways than we've given them credit for. So the pandemic has had a huge effect on us. But when it first hit, and my husband came down quite badly with COVID quite early in the pandemic. That was just as I'd been given my edit letter for the book, which is always the moment when, you get a long letter and it says, this is everything we like about how you're doing the book. And these are the things that aren't coming through. And, could you think about rethinking? And I have to say it was a challenging edit letter, which it would have been in any situation, because they said rightly that it would be a good idea to rethink the sequence of events in the second half of the book. Mm-hmm. And they were absolutely right. It was the right thing to do. But of course, that it would have been a challenging edit to do at any point, to sort of rethink, okay, I'm going to turn around the events and this is going to happen before this. And, it's like a jigsaw when you fling everything out of the box and you have to figure out how to assemble it. But getting that news, getting that edit letter just at the beginning of the pandemic, and it was a tricky time to try to be creative and think out of the box, think of new ways that my story could fit together. Because my memory now, when I look back at doing those edits, was the time I finally managed to break through, and figure out how I could reshape that plot. It was sitting out at the picnic table in our garden with the flowers around and the bees and the birds. My kids and I got really good at identifying birds, and it gave me enough peace and enough escape that I could leave the stressful world of my reality and enter into a more creative space. And it all resonated so much because, of course, what Cordelia in the book really loves and responds to is nature. And nature is really what saved me as I was rewriting this book. I really appreciated social media because I live in a small town in Wales, quite far away from the hub, publishing, which is really London in the UK. And I also published in America, which is obviously in an entire different country that I can't be there for, most of the time. And so social media has always given me the ability to relate to readers and to other writers and, other friends in publishing every day, despite living so far away from them. And I've been tremendously grateful as a parent, actually, for all of the publishing events that have gone online this past year, because in the past, I used to think how wonderful it would be to take my kids to various, bookish events, but they just never really happen in our part of Wales. They're so often centered in London, really, mostly just in London, or in some of the other big English cities. And it's been such a gift to be able to have my kids, see these authors online, see them actually talking and ask them questions through the online, usually there's a little chat box and things like that. It's been wonderful to see my kids get to relate to other authors that way and to the authors of their favorite books. So I've been tremendously grateful. I've thought many, many times how much worse and more horrifying this pandemic would have been if we didn't have any way of relating to each other online, for all the obvious, big flaws in our current social media system. I'll say that as a writer, I'm always doing my own guesswork here because the people who really have a much stronger sense of how publishing is being affected are going to be the editors and the booksellers and the agents. I would say it's been very reassuring to me that children's book sales have actually soared during the pandemic. People, in the same way that we've been so grateful for the internet and for video games and everything that helps us socialize, people have also been finding wonderful escape and solace in books. And the unfortunate part of that is it's been harder for new writers and less already well-known writers to be discovered, because obviously the best way to find new authors is to go to a bookstore or a library and wander around and see everything that's on offer and try it all out. And we haven't been able to do that for so much of the past year and a half. So I can only say I hope that publishers will be keeping that in mind. In some ways, now more than ever, the best advice is just keep on focusing on what is the book that you want to write. What is the book that reflects these truths that you believe about the world? What is the book that will give you an escape as you're writing it? Because first of all, that is the absolute best chance you have of selling it and of readers relating to it, is if you honestly poured yourself into it. And second of all, publishing is such an uncertain game. And what I've learned over the years is that when I've tried to write books that aren't to my own taste, just to try to chase some publishing fad or please someone else who's not me, it never works for anybody. Whereas if I write a book that I love and that I care about, then first of all, those are the only books I've ever managed to sell. And second of all, as ruthless as this sounds, not every book you write is going to sell. And you need to be sure you're writing the books you love so that you don't regret writing any of them. Every book that I wrote that I loved that I didn't sell, I'm still happy to have written because it helped me to write it. And that's what you have to focus on, is finding the joy in your writing for your own sake, as well as because that's the best chance you've got at publishing it later.